All right, well, let's get started. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Tiara Curry. I'm a senior scientist in the Saving Life on Earth campaign here at the Center for Biological Diversity. And we're excited that you're here to learn more about the many ways that we're working to end extinction. Tonight, we have a special program about endangered freshwater habitats in California. And unfortunately, this situation isn't unique. Around the world, freshwater habitats are at the leading edge of the extinction crisis. And to save them, people who care, like us and like all of you who are joining this webinar, are going to have to use our voices to stand up for the very right to exist of the unique plants and animals that rely on these special habitats. And so our speakers tonight are experts in this room. We're going to hear from the filmmaker, then we're going to hear from staff in our Urban Wildlands program who organized this webinar. We'll save time at the end for your questions, so you can type those in the Q&A box. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to our awesome speakers to introduce themselves. We're going to start with the filmmaker.
Okay, hello, my name is Jacob Morrison. I'm honored to be here. I was the writer, director, editor, producer on Overusing, and excited to talk to you guys.
Hi, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Reed Wainscoat, and I'm a campaigner in the Urban Wildlands program here at the center.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ross Middlemas. I'm a staff attorney in the Urban Wildlands program with the center.
Thanks, you all. And behind the scenes, we have Griselda, who is awesome and makes all of this possible. And she's going to share the film trailer with us in case you didn't have a chance to watch it yet. And Jacob has graciously extended the time period when you can watch it. So if you didn't watch it before the webinar, you can watch it through this weekend. All right, I'm going to hand it over to Griselda.
In Southern California, there's 19 million people, 1 out of every 2 Californians, 1 in every 16 Americans. And our mission is to provide water to them.
We have an incredible plumbing system. It's really a remarkable engineering feat. You have to admire it.
We just take too much fresh water out of the ecosystem to support the native species and the estuary.
We've simply taken more water out of the ecosystem than any ecosystem anywhere has been able to survive.
If you have salt intrusion there, you're screwing up sources of drinking water.
It's not suitable to drink, and your dog dies if it goes swimming.
We're delivering water that belongs to the California public that we rely on to grow a lot of crops exported out of the country to China, the Middle East, etc.
Maybe San Francisco shouldn't exist where it is because it doesn't have adequate water to support its needs. Maybe Los Angeles shouldn't exist. That's ignoring the reality.
And so they have to keep trying to get additional water through any means necessary.
Same issues have been fought over for generations, lifetimes.
Water is so valuable. We're going to fight for every last drop.
My grandfather told me, there may come a day, son, when you'll have to go sit on that pump with a shotgun.
It's the same game. Get me water first. The hell with the other people.
Human beings have so dramatically shaped nature that we're now having to think about how we exist within nature if we want to exist at all.
The good news is there are many solutions for what we need to be doing. We have the money, we have the institutions, we have the brain power to solve our water problems, and we haven't solved them yet. But if we can't solve them here, it's going to be difficult to think about how we're going to solve water challenges around the world.
California's water issues are what we're seeing around the planet. As population keeps growing, there will not be enough water at some point in the future.
If you think it's hard now, imagine a world 15, 20 years from now with climate change making it harder and harder.
The system is broken. We would like to have rivers with some fish in them in the future. We may not have rivers, and we may not have fish. So do you want to do something?
Thanks, Griselda. So, Jacob, this film was so powerful. I was so just angry and motivated and realizing that it's up to us to stand up to these special interests and try to protect this ecosystem. And I just wanted to hear from you, like, what inspired you to make this film?
Well, first of all, thank you very much. That's very, very nice to hear. I really made this film by accident in a way. I wasn't someone who was passionate about these issues. and then like eventually worked themselves up to making a movie about it. But really, I was a film student at USC, and I was going into my senior year of college and thinking that I wanted to make a short film about the drought at the time, because it was during the height of California's sort of last drought, and just thought that I might be able to make something interesting and learn a little bit about an issue that I didn't know really anything about. I didn't know where my water came from. I didn't know a lot, and I didn't know how much I didn't know. And as I was going out interviewing people, I eventually interviewed a guy named John Herrick, who's the attorney for the South Delta. And he, interestingly, even though he's not really, someone who you would think would know a lot about something like fish biology or freshwater ecosystems, because his interests are more to protect farming in that area. But he was telling me about this place called the Delta, where 2/3 of Californians get at least some of their water, but this place that most people had never heard of, how there were 6 fish species in this area that were heading towards extinction because of sort of mismanagement, as he would say, and overuse of water resources, and how there were just these big players involved in this story. And it kind of reminded me of that classic movie Chinatown in the way that he was describing what was going on, but almost at a bigger scale. So I just thought it sounded like a movie and sounded like something that I was really gonna find interesting and a journey worth taking. So I just sort of took the leap and started making the movie, having really no comprehension at that time of how much work that would actually be and how much I would have to learn. And so it was a huge process. And I think had I known what I was getting myself into, I never would have done it. But I'm so glad that I did. So that's sort of, and through the process, as I learned more, I became more passionate about the issues, and now I care deeply about them. But yeah, a couple of years ago, I couldn't have told you anything really about where my water came from.
That's actually really cool that like the process made you passionate about it. And I'm glad you didn't know what you were getting yourself into, because I'm really glad that you did this project.
Yeah, thank you.
So Elizabeth, tell us about the Urban Wildlands program, kind of, broad stroke, and then also about the campaign you lead against water privatization.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So the Urban Wildlands program, big picture, focuses on protecting California's wildlife and habitats that are vulnerable to all sorts of unsustainable development, while also advocating for healthy and climate resilient communities. When it comes to our water work, we are guided by this belief that water should stay where it naturally flows to protect ecological and community health. So, as the film talked about, water is a public resource, and thus we believe it should be allocated to benefit the public good rather than corporate interests like Big Ag. And so that's why we intervene and we litigate over the privatization of water to protect endangered species and local communities from greedy Big Ag and unsustainable development, which often fuel costly and destructive water infrastructure projects at the taxpayer's expense. So this is not a new problem. If we can pull up the slides, that would be great. Perfect. So for decades, Big Ag has been sucking our rivers dry. And as the map here illustrates, and as Jacob mentioned earlier, 80% of California water demand comes from the southern 2/3 of the state, and this is primarily for agriculture. And without intervention, Big Ag will continue to overdraft our rivers and streams to increase their personal wealth. Instead of investing in massive water infrastructure projects that harm native wildlife and local communities, we at the center really think that we should be focusing on water conservation measures, including reducing overall demand, increasing efficient use and reuse of existing supply, and utilizing sustainable storage methods such as groundwater banking. Salmon in Northern California and the tribes and coastal fishing communities that rely on them shouldn't have to suffer in dry years to ensure Big Ag can maximize yields of high value products like livestock and almonds, primarily cultivated for export. The center definitely knows it's time to invest in community and ecosystem health rather than continue subsidizing an industry that is destroying an essential public resource. And that's why the center takes a watershed approach to its water work. So through litigation, advocacy, and public outreach, we have fought to preserve the critical habitats of the Delta, Santa Ana, Utah or Santa Clara River, and Napa rivers. Next slide, please. We also work to protect riparian species like the Delta smelt highlighted in the film, as well as the Central California coast steelhead trout that are struggling because of habitat losses from water diversions, dams, and urban development. And we're very hopeful our engagement will result in a historic shift in California water management away from corporate interests and in favor of ecosystems and communities.
Thanks, Elizabeth. So this seems like just big, overwhelming issues with no shortage of battles that you could get involved in. Ross, can you tell us about some of the specific projects that you're working on?
Certainly. Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. It can be a little bit overwhelming. And I think maybe a lot of the viewers of Jacob's excellent movie feel the same way, right? It's huge and it's a little bit diffuse and difficult to understand where the rubber hits the road, so to speak. So yeah, the Urban Wildlands program, we do have a very broad and varied approach to our water work, which is, I think, by necessity because of the diversity of issues, geographic, and kind of the types of projects we engage on. And so I guess to try to break it down for the sake of this webinar, I'll kind of put them in two categories. So infrastructure geared development, and so that might be new pipelines like in the Delta that are highlighted, or new reservoirs to store water and then send it to south of the Delta users. And the other category would be more on the demand side. So development that drives the demand and perpetuates the cycle of moving water from where we would like it to stay for communities and ecosystems to areas that it's not being used very sustainably, and it's perpetuating the system that doesn't make much sense, to be frank. And so all of this is a multi-pronged attack to try to change the status quo, as Elizabeth was noting, into educating people, but also changing the minds of elected officials to stop promoting projects that continue to operate in this false assumption that we can continue to move water without ecologic or human health repercussions. Yeah, so we can start the slideshow on slide 3, please. Great. So a couple examples of projects that our program is working on right now. And as an example of a really destructive wet reservoir proposal, this is the Sites Reservoir. This is a proposal to put a 1.5 million acre foot new reservoir in Northern California, a little bit northwest of Sacramento, in Colusa County. This reservoir would be filled from the Sacramento River, and then sent downstream through the Delta and then pumped south to various water users as far south as Los Angeles County. And as you can see in the picture on the right, this is a really beautiful site in its current state, and it's habitat for a number of special status species that we try to protect throughout the range and through a lot of our work, such as swinson hawks, golden eagles, burrowing owls, western pond turtles, western spadefoot toads, California red-legged frogs, among others. And not to mention the impacts that filling this reservoir would have on the salmon, smelt, and other fish species in the Sacramento River. Next slide, please. Another project was the proposal to raise the Shasta Dam. There's a proposal to, I think, boost the dam's level by around 18 or 20 feet. That related raise would have inundated tens of thousands of acres of habitat around the lake and destroyed critical habitat where these very cute and charismatic Shasta salamanders live almost exclusively. And we were able to help push back against that proposal. And for now, fingers crossed, seems like that won't be moving forward. And next slide. And kind of heading toward the other end of the state, which I think shows kind of the diversity of issues we deal with. The Cadiz project was a proposal to pump groundwater from beneath the Mojave Desert in eastern San Bernardino County and move that water to urban users in Los Angeles and Orange counties. The proposal would have destroyed the desert ecosystem that is largely reliant on groundwater-fed springs and harming species, desert tortoise and desert bighorn sheep, among others. And again, that's kind of another success, which I'll note later. You can turn the slideshow off now, please. In addition to those discrete projects, we're also very involved in the Delta and have been for decades, both litigation and advocacy. We've been litigating, we litigated over the Twin Tunnel proposal that was noted in the film. We're part of the coalition that stopped that. We're now litigating over the single tunnel proposal, as well as statewide planning processes that will continue to send water south. We're also fighting individual water districts such as Wildlands in their attempts to lock in their over-extractive water contracts, both state and federal, as they try to ensure that they will continue to get too much water into the future. And so that's kind of the infrastructure side. On the other side is more to the demand. And in addition to some of the policies that we're advocating that Elizabeth mentioned, as far as reuse and trying to move away from this reliance on imported water, we also attack specific development projects, a lot of them in Southern California, that would bring really water-intensive development to areas that don't have a sustainable local supply. And a lot of these projects take the form of mixed-use development, so kind of classic urban sprawl in the eastern parts of San Diego County, northern LA, the Inland Empire of Riverside, and San Bernardino County. And these are putting large homes that have really high water demand, as well as businesses, in places that they have to pipe in imported water, either from the Delta or from the Colorado River in many cases. And so we challenge these projects that we challenge on a number of fronts, right? They're eating up habitat, they're putting more cars on the road, but the water is also a big component of that. And we've had some success pushing back on projects. Recently, the Otay Ranch projects in San Diego County, Villages of Lakeview and Eastern Riverside, and Fanita Ranch is one we've been dealing with for decades in San Diego County as well. So that's by no means the whole iceberg, so to speak, of the Urban Wildlands water work, but hopefully that gives a glimpse of the breadth of our work, which poses some challenges, just keep our organization in line, but a lot of opportunity as well to move the needle toward a more beneficial system. Back to you, Tara.
I feel like around the country, there are developers who look at like patches of wildlife habitat and they don't think, oh, look, it's cool, there's some wildlife habitat left. They're like, oh, I can make money off of that, without thinking, is there water? Is this in a fire zone? Is this going to cut off a mountain lion population? And it's like, it's the same story around the whole country. And it seems like in Arizona and California in particular, that's where it's magnified and like you're dealing with it every day. And one of the things about the film, like the chart of water usage, like LA's population was going up, but water usage wasn't, because they were reusing water. That made me feel hopeful, like we can do this in a smarter way. So I just want you guys to share some like hopeful things with us, or some projects that you won, these Saving Life on Earth webinars, because of the immensity of the climate crisis and the biodiversity crisis, can be really depressing. And what gives me hope is like the little victories along the way, because the victories you have, other people are having victories, and people caring are going to make the difference. And so give us some good news.
Certainly. Yeah, and to your point, like, these land use issues are really prevalent in the West and in California, and water is a big part of that. And I think having a greater understanding of what the impacts are when something's proposed in the water context is really important. And I applaud the film for highlighting that. But yes, there is cause for optimism and to keep fighting. I mean, we wouldn't do it if we didn't think we could win, because we have won and we continue to do so. So some specific instances, and I will note, like, in the water context, these are long-term battles. We are going up against very powerful entities and special interests that are entrenched and are not easily scared away. Good thing is neither are we, and we are, we're here for the long haul. And a couple of these examples really demonstrate how long these processes last. So one that I mentioned earlier is Cadiz. That was a project that had been proposed, I think, 20 years ago, went through different phases. They weren't granted a permit under the Obama administration. Trump revived it. We were finally able to, I think, finish it off in 2019 when a federal court ruled against the Trump administration. And so that was huge. I mean, again, that's the Mojave Desert ecosystem that would be in collapse if this private entity was able to suck that aquifer dry. Another example is our one of two current suits we have that is pushing back on Wildlands and their attempt to get more water from the Delta and other water systems. We were able to stop them from basically turning a short-term contract into a long-term contract, which would have locked in their current deliveries. And we have current litigation that's challenging the same process that impacts 60 different water districts, so millions of acre feet of water. So there is hope to really change, at least stem the tide until either they quit or everyone else comes to their senses and we start making better decisions collectively. And I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention the tunnels. There's a reason that it's a single tunnel proposal now, and that it's just getting started. And it's because folks like the center and other advocacy groups really dug in and made the twin tunnel proposal so distasteful that finally Newsom decided that it was a no-go. And of course, he substituted a maybe a little bit less terrible project, and now we're here to stop that. So I think there's a lot of reason to be positive, and we're currently fighting the Sites Reservoir project. There's a huge coalition, not just nonprofits, but also groups that represent family farmers and tribal groups, and huge amount of support to push back on that. And there will be an action item about that for all of you to jump on later. So I think there is, cause for hope. And I would just say, big picture takeaway is that, these issues are urgent. They affect all of us. They impact the species we care about and the habitats that we love. And so films like River's End shine a really important light on what groups like the Center are doing, but also how important it is for other folks to increase their understanding of how these issues interact with their day-to-day life, and find ways to engage, even if that's just talking it up to a friend or family and getting more folks on board. So hopefully the presentation of what the Urban Wildlands program does has lifted your spirits a little bit after what can be a little bit of a downer, watching really hard-hitting documentaries that shine lights on all the somewhat bad things that are happening. And yeah, I think together we can push for a better system that benefits species, habitats, and communities throughout California.
Thanks, Ross. So Elizabeth, what can we do? How can people help? Give us some concrete things we can do.
Well, as Ross mentioned, being here today, staying engaged with the center's work, and, I'll do another plug for the film, because I do think that water is one of those topics within the environmental movement that there's a lot of misinformation about, or just not a lot of information about how it directly connects to communities and where people can plug in, and also the history, the very long history that kind of frames the issues. And so I think the film does a really good job for educating folks in California about our history. And so it is streaming on platforms. We'll definitely get you that information. So share that with your friends and family, and try to get them to watch the film and spread the word that way. Of course, continue to stay engaged with the center's work and participate in the public comment process on local measures that determine how your local water is managed. But more urgently, the proposed Sites Reservoir project that Ross mentioned earlier will destroy critical habitat for wildlife and harm local communities. It threatens Northern California's salmon and the tribes and coastal fishing communities that rely on them. And it fails to account for the realities of climate change driven shifts in the amount of rain and snow that we expect in the West. So California just can't afford this water grab. And to stop this project, the center needs you to take action today or tomorrow. The deadline is tomorrow, and tell the state to reject this project. And we have an action alert all set up for you, and we'll send the link in the chat right now so that you can take action and help stop this project.
Yeah, so maybe screenshot or take a picture or paste that action alert so that you can take it, and it's 48 hours, right? Like, this is an urgent last minute action where we need your voice, where you can stand up for very specific species. And Ross, I have to tell you, when you said that the Shasta salamander was like charismatic, my heart just started leaping out of my chest, because most people don't think of salamanders or amphibians or anything slimy as being charismatic. So I love it that you said that, because of course they are. Like, they're adorable. Jacob, are you working on a new project, or is this an issue you're going to keep pursuing?
Yeah, I am, but it's not actually a documentary, so I won't bore you guys with it too much. But yeah, I'm making another movie soon.
And it's a secret. We'll keep you posted. One of my favorite things about River's End was how you highlighted how the people who want the water for economic reasons demonize the little species. So it immediately became the little 2-inch fish, the little 3-inch fish. And that just made me think about the snail darter in Tennessee back in the 1970s, the first test of the Endangered Species Act. And the reality is they wanted to create like this luxury lake, and they flooded hundreds of family farms, drug people out of their houses, burned their houses down behind them, flooded Cherokee sacred sites. And all the people who were opposing it in the media got narrowed down to, oh, the snail darter, the 2-inch fish. And there's no reality about the people and the sites that were going to be harmed. And like the Delta smelt is kind of the same. It's a fish, but it represents the whole ecosystem and all of the other interest. And yes, the fish has the right to exist, absolutely, but it's part of this whole bigger story that gets narrowed down in the media. And Elizabeth, like, you communicate about this all the time, so you have to counteract that narrative, especially it gets pinned on, the fish is going to drive small family farms out of business and contribute to world hunger. And you published this editorial recently that said, no, it's not actually about that. Can you tell us just a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, we've definitely been engaging in the media about trying to counter that narrative. I will give credit to Ross. He did have a op-ed specifically titled Fish versus Farms, and kind of really talking about that very specific strategy that we see from the industry. But it's something that I I think that the Urban Wildlands program does really well. Something that I'm really proud about is that we connect these issues, these environmental issues and ecological issues back to the community. And we work within the space, because the Urban Wildlands is at that interface of where people are living and then how that interacts with the natural world. So I think that that's really key to almost all of our issues. We work on everything related to sustainable development. So it's definitely something that I think just helps the average person understand why they should care about a species that seemingly doesn't impact their life without someone like the center helping connect the dots. And also helping to shine light on some of the aspects and incentives behind the private industry and why they're trying to frame the issue this way. It's not to benefit small scale farmers or fishermen. It's not to benefit or feed the world. That's an argument that they like to use a lot, is that they need this water to feed the world. But if you look at the statistics, they are exporting a lot of these crops, and they are, choosing crops that have high value, not necessarily that are needed to feed, communities within California or even the United States or even the world. So that is definitely something that is a narrative we're trying to fight every day, and something that we hope more people will become more and more aware of.
Do any of you have any more thoughts or things you want to share before we turn to the viewer questions? All right, so we'll start taking your questions. One of them is a question that I got emailed multiple times this week already. It's about nuts, almonds, and pistachios and their water uses versus animal agriculture and dairy. And is the center saying don't eat almonds and ignoring the cows? So can you all talk about that?
Yeah. I can. I think, and this is demonstrated by our work and the projects we engage on, is we don't differentiate between the really negative impacts of corporately held industrialized agriculture. And the crops and the products that these entities are producing by and large are tree nuts, dairy, and beef, or the alfalfa to feed beef. These are kind of like the big water users. So for us, water districts aren't placing orders. Oh, this maps water for almonds, that vice versa. But it is true that during the drought, planting of almond trees increased, right? Because it's a high value crop, and not that not planting almonds will solve the problem, but that is very indicative of how the profit motives of corporate ag is driving these catastrophic ecosystem outcomes. And it's an example. So of course, we don't approve, and the center works against industrialized meat and dairy production across the board, across the country, in a lot of our other programs. And Urban Wildlands is no different. So we don't demonize one over the other, but they provide more poignant examples depending on the context.
Thanks, Ross. And we have a whole food campaign. You can go to Take Extinction Off Your Plate, and you'll get recipes and suggestions and carbon footprints. And we're working on that. Our population and sustainability program in particular works on that. So there's an interesting question about the public trust doctrine and how important it was in saving Mono Lake, and if that could be used in the Delta battle.
Try to take that on. I'm not an expert in public trust litigation per se, and I'm not intimately familiar with Mono Lake, other than knowing that it was a case that helped establish the importance of public trust. It comes up. It's not at the central issue in the current Delta litigation as far as the statewide planning and proposals like the tunnels that I'm aware of, but it is increasingly becoming important in groundwater, and that's kind of the next frontier of California water battles. Groundwater is now being regulated as of a law that was passed 5 years ago. The Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And so the connection between surface water and groundwater and how the public trust doctrine fits into that is something that is, I think, a live issue both legally and from a policy standpoint too. So it's certainly, you know, it's hard because it on its face, it's such a powerful idea, right? That the water and the species that rely on it belong to the people of the state, and it's the state's obligation to take care of those resources. And then you see what's actually happening on the ground as demonstrated in the film and in other contexts, and it's a little bit of a disconnect. So hopefully it does become more of a central guiding force in our water system planning. And I'm sure there will be more ways for it to be implemented going forward.
Just want to add into, sorry, this is a really interesting side note. Tom Birmingham, who's the general manager of Wildlands Water District, back in the day represented Los Angeles in that case to Mono Lake, and of course Los Angeles lost. But it is interesting talking to Tom Birmingham, and he still thinks that that was a wrongly decided case. So it provides some insight into just how different parties think through these issues. Yeah.
That really struck me in the film too, when somebody said, "We've given nature so much water and so much money." It's like, wait, we're giving nature water and money? It's a whole different way of thinking than the way I think about the world and rights of nature and ecocide. But that one really bowled me over. But we're giving water to the environment instead of the environment giving us life in general. So there's a bunch of questions about desalinization. I don't know who wants to take that one. Just like California has tons of resources, why aren't they pursuing it?
Yeah, that is something that a narrative that we have addressed in the media, as it is one of the infrastructure projects that people will propose as part of the solution. But it is highly destructive to the coastal ecosystems and also very energy intensive. So in our mind, it's really a last resort for communities that have no local water supply and no ability to, through reuse and recycling, to rely on their local water supply. In California, that's really only San Diego. Even LA, there has been research done that has proven, because of our groundwater reserves, if there was groundwater remediation and recycling and reuse and decrease in demand through, native landscaping, climate-friendly landscaping, all of that, that LA could be 100% dependent on local water. Sounds crazy, but they do have those groundwater reserves. So there's so much that we can and should do before we talk about desalinization. And in California specifically, there isn't a strong argument for it outside of San Diego.
I also think maybe is it worth saying that we might just be overusing a lot of water in California. We might not really need to go get so much more water, but just be more thoughtful about how and when we use it.
And there's all the other impacts of big ag too, the pesticides and like the neonicotinoids that are killing pollinators, and do we want these huge industrial farms if we have to desalinize water to support this private interest, which is another question. How do we stop water companies from privatizing profit from public resources? And they mentioned Nestle specifically because Nestle has so many like planned bottling plants to take like public water and sell it for private profit.
Yeah, I can speak. The center is actively pushing back on one of Nestle's attempts to essentially steal water from public land and bottle it right now. And I think overall, how do we push back? I think as we've demonstrated today, it's a combination of multi-pronged efforts, education, getting people to understand what's at stake, the ballot box, right? Knowing what's or how your elected officials deal with these projects, and then establishing policies that require a certain amount of water to stay in the river. That there's been a process ongoing for decades to try to establish water quality controls for the Delta and for the Sacramento River that would mandate a certain level of flow at all points of the year, in light of what the species need. And that's always being pushed back. There's special interest groups, and it's just this ongoing thing. So, that's something that can be done. We can just say, hey, like, we're not taking more water out than what these species and these communities need. And I think that really requires a kind of a paradigm shift in how we value certain interests over others. And is our current food production system worth it? Do we have to do this? I think these are questions that need to be amplified and have everyone address on an individual level, but then at a group, and it kind of builds out from there. And I think there's a groundswell that's been going. I think it's if anything, the drought has focused that the last 6 or 7 years. So hopefully that continues.
So this might pivot a little bit, but there's several questions about solar panels and growing crops under solar panels, and if that can reduce water needs for agriculture. And then, that kind of pivots into the other work that you're doing around sustainable energy development. Do you want to address that?
I can take a stab at it, at least in part. I'm not a farmer, so I won't speak to the biological repercussions of growing things under a somewhat shaded cover. There are ideas and proposals, and this has been done around the world, to put solar panels on canals. We have an extensive canal system in California, and we lose an astronomical amount of water to evaporation and seepage. I think India has a project where they cover their canals with solar panels, and the results were really positive. California uses, I think, 12% of its energy just moving water around the state. So there are really positive benefits to be had from projects like that. But again, it's a funding and who's going to pay for it, and who benefits from it. The water districts wouldn't benefit from that. So, and they're the ones that are calling the shots as far as water infrastructure goes at this point.
Elizabeth, several people have asked about your background and the flowers that are behind you. They look like poppies and lupins. You want to talk about your wildflowers a little bit?
Sure, happy to. I wish I could take credit for this amazing photo, but I should credit the Santa Monica Mountains. Like they have a public domain photo bank of things, and because I live in Los Angeles, I wanted to choose some photos from where I live, but I love to go out in nature. I'm just not a great photographer, so I had to take some from the professionals, but glad everyone is enjoying them.
Yeah, there's several comments about them. They're lovely. A very specific question: what percentage of water in California is used for agriculture? And specifically, you had a slide that said 80% of water demand comes from the southern 2/3 of the state. Do you want to just throw some statistics out there?
I don't have a ton of specifics, but I will say, and this gets to something you noted earlier, Tiara, about giving water to nature. And there's there are competing sets of data sets out there about how much % of water is used for which industries. From our perspective, 80% of the water that is used in California is used for agriculture. Other folks say that it's only 40% because they count the water that stays in ecosystems as being used. As you noted, I think that's absurd. You know, if we're trying to tabulate, you know, what the fish use and what they need to survive in communities. So yeah, 80% of water that is used in California is for agriculture. And then, you know, urban uses are, you know, after that. And, you know, so from our perspective, we should not be counting the water that stays where it belongs and where it originated as being used. That is just water doing what water does and helping creatures and species and communities survive. So I don't know if other folks have more specific stats. I'd love to hear it.
Someone pointed out that better use of wastewater is a positive, optimistic, like good news thing. Are there more plans to, or are we working on, you know, improved use of wastewater?
Los Angeles is certainly, but I feel like maybe Elizabeth or someone else here could speak to it with more detail.
We are just, you know, engaged with the water agencies to promote what we think are, you know, the best policies, and also to integrate the most up-to-date science. That's something that I was involved with, and how I'm familiar with the different studies and models that have been done in LA, because my previous position was through a research institute at UCLA. So there's definitely been a lot of there's a lot of interest academically too in investing in these new emerging technologies for water recycling and stormwater capture and all of that. So I think at this point, there's so much that we could do and so much that we're not doing. It's really just about getting a strong public support and engagement when these decisions are happening, to ensure that you know, the science can't be ignored and the public interest can't be ignored, and the you know, rights of species can't be ignored. So we're definitely engaging in all of the regions across California. Coming to mind, you know, we do a lot of work, Ross does a lot of work in Napa. I'm down here in Southern California working in LA and San Diego. And as opportunities pop up across the state or at the statewide level, we're definitely engaging there on more broad policies.
If I'm not mistaken, I think by the year 2035, LA is trying to recycle all of its wastewater. Is that still true?
Well, the city and the county have two separate sustainability plans. I believe the county states that its goal is only like 80% local water by 2045. So they're, you know, that's a lot better than what we're doing now. And it was great to see their leadership. But as I said, again, there have been models that said that it could be 100%. So why not push for what it could be? Best case scenario.
The action alert that we asked people to take is about the site's reservoir, and there's a specific question about that and its threat to Northern California salmon and tribal communities and fishing communities.
Yeah, I can address that. So the reservoir is being billed as, you know, it's off-stream storage that would in theory store water in wet years when there's extra water, and then be able to send that down, you know. And this comes in response to the narrative that, oh, and when it rains and snows, we're losing so much water out to sea, right? Like it all goes through the Delta under the Golden Gate Bridge, and we could have used it, right? which ignores the fact that that's how the Delta operates and is supposed to work, and that's what a lot of the species in the Delta require. But additionally, the water that will be diverted pretty high up on the Sacramento River. So that will have impacts downstream on the aquatic species that require adequate flows at different times of the year. There are different salmon runs that need adequate flow, and that impacts temperature and habitat as well. So this project is just another way to get more water out of the Delta and get it south. And the tribal communities throughout the Sacramento River area, all the way up into the areas around Churney River, because it would take some Churney River water to have been incredibly active and really effective in outreach to media, as well as pushing elected officials. And it's hard. I was viewing a California Water Commission hearing last month, and the leader of the commission, cut off a tribal president of a tribe, which is a sovereign in our country, cut them off in their comments when speaking on behalf of their people when talking about sites. So it's tough, and this is their livelihood is at stake, and so projects like this, that however they spin them, they're just trying to take more water out of the system that's already overtaxed, and the species and the people that rely on it just can't accept that, and they shouldn't have to.
Speaking of those interrelations, someone asked about, is there a coalition or a website where people can see all the people who are working to protect the Delta and the various uses?
I don't think, it's a complicated issue. Not everyone looks at protecting the Delta in the same way. So I don't think that you could trust a single, not saying people can't trust in biological diversity, but I'm just saying that there wouldn't be, I think, some kind of a nonpartisan source per se that would do that. I'm not sure if I'm making sense, but there's just, for example, there's an organization in the Delta that I interviewed called the Coalition for a Sustainable Delta, which by name you would think would have a similar mission as you guys. And in fact, they're funded by the Resnicks, essentially. So there really, I don't think, could be such a thing. But there's obviously lots of organizations that are doing great work around the Delta, like yourselves and NRDC, and so there's a lot for sure.
Someone asked a specific question. It's kind of broad. What's your opinion of the Delta Stewardship Council? I'm not familiar with this, so I don't know who to point it to.
One thing that I've heard a lot of in interviews about the Delta Stewardship Council is that it is tasked with maintaining co-equal goals there, which would mean both using the Delta's resources, but also maintaining, I guess, proper water and whatnot for fish and wildlife. But I think one of the issues that people find with it is that at least the head of that organization is appointed by the governor. So I think in instances like that, it can be similar to the State Water Board. There's just fear that even though it's supposed to be this independent body, that's difficult to accomplish when the people on that body can get replaced or not reappointed if they don't do what the governor wants them to do, which certainly has happened a lot in California water politics. So I think that is the criticism I hear a lot about the Delta Stewardship Council.
I think I can reinforce that assessment, and I'll try to do so diplomatically. It's an organization that's tasked with ensuring a healthy Delta, right, among others at the state level, and the Delta is not healthy. So, I'll leave it there.
Political appointees, not always science driven, not always supportive of science, often aggressive about science. So there's several questions about the Endangered Species Act and take and in-stream flows, and when does take come in and how does that affect the flows? Ross, Elizabeth, I don't know who wants to take that one.
I'll try to be brief. So the main species that impact water removal from the Delta would be various salmon runs in the Delta smelt, among others, but those are here that most people talk about. And it's a little bit in flux right now because I think the biological opinions issued under the Trump administration, which would have eviscerated the standing protections for those species, have been rescinded. But right now there's a little bit of a question about what takes their place while they're being redrafted. And again, the biological opinions establish, what can happen in order to protect these species, which we've listed under the Endangered Species Act, and that we have to, prevent their extinction and hopefully promote their survival and recovery. So there's a little bit of a in between, and because of ongoing litigation and what the current administration is trying to do. But yes, the in-stream flow and the amount of water that's flowing, when it's flowing, is a critical part of what is required under the Endangered Species Act. And it gets further complicated by who is making decisions that impacts that, right? We have Shasta Lake, which is controlled by the federal government, and Lake Oroville under state control. These are interconnected water systems. There's an example last spring, Feds, Bureau of Reclamation, released way too much water early in the systems they thought they had it to give. And then we didn't get any more water, and a bunch of salmon died because it got too warm and the flows decreased, right? And so that's mismanagement, and even Endangered Species Act protections weren't enough to solve that. So hopefully we can get really good biological opinions in place and set in-stream flow standards that actually protect the species and hold up.
It's another reason why we need a visionary Fish and Wildlife Service that's willing to take the bold action that's needed to end extinction, because the Endangered Species Act, the intent of the act wasn't just to protect the species, but also the ecosystems upon which they depend. And the service is apologetic of their mission. They're apologetic of trying to protect the individual species. And they look at it as like, what's the minimum we can do to keep 2 fish alive in a lab, and then put the bred fish back in the stream, instead of how can we protect this ecosystem, which is their mandate. So, well, you can learn more about all of these issues on our website. Thank you so much to the 3 of you, and to Jacob in particular for making this film. Our Urban Wildlands program is involved in multiple campaigns. You can go to biologicaldiversity.org and click on programs, and then click on Urban Wildlands and learn more about their work. To get the video of this recording, go to biologicaldiversity.org, click on action, and then events. And then there are links there to recordings of all of the Saving Life on Earth webinars. You can email us with any of your questions that we didn't get to tonight, and take that action alert. And thank you so much for tuning in. Our digital team, Griselda, made this possible. We will send you emails about upcoming webinars. And as always, we're so grateful for your support in this work, because we couldn't do it without you. So even though it's depressing, you do make a difference. So just keep spreading the word and keep doing what you do to help end extinction. All right. Thank you.
Hey, can I just say really quickly, the film is out, so you can go see it, and it definitely relies on people like you sharing it with your friends and your network, and letting them know that it exists and telling them to watch it. So if you feel so inclined, we would appreciate it, because I think the first step towards addressing these issues is just getting more people to learn about them in the first place. So I think hopefully it can do a little bit of good.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jacob.